Hey everybody, Rob here for Rob's Gaming Network, and I thought that I would start a new mini-series. There are a lot of people on YouTube right now that they're either the age of 12 or they're not old enough to remember exactly how games were 10 years ago. All this stuff with 4-player co-op, online play, online matches, rankings, and all that stuff, that didn't exist about 10 years ago. That was in the baby crawling stages and the prototype stage. So in this series, I want to show you what gaming culture was like 10 years ago, what we had to deal with, what we played, what games were out, and what we thought about them at the time. Now, I want to take you back to 2001 in gaming history when the PlayStation 1 was out. The PlayStation 2 had just come out, and that was the biggest thing since Pop Rocks. The Nintendo 64 was beginning to age, the Game Boy Advance was a brand new idea, and the Dreamcast was out for about 18 months, released by Sega, and it is beginning to start its decline. About 5 or 6 years before 2001, we had a release for the Super Nintendo. There was a game called Mortal Kombat that was released, and if you're not old enough to remember that, that was really the very first bloody, gruesome, spine-ripping, ball-busting action fighting game that ever came out in the gaming industry. And at that point, the ESRB, which stands for the Entertainment Software Rating Board that gives the games, you know, the little letter in the bottom right, bottom left corner, well, that didn't exist, and Mortal Kombat is the reason why that exists today. And there are two politicians, and I'm not going to go into politics, Joe Lieberman, who is an independent, and Hillary Clinton, who is a Democrat, were both vehemently opposed to violent video games and said they did bad things to the minds of children. Now, in later studies that were done, there was no correlation between violent video games and people going out and committing, you know, stuff that you see in Grand Theft Auto 3. In 2001, we also saw the release of Conker's Bad Fur Day, which added, you know, sexual innuendos, some big giant teapot with brass balls. And parents weren't very happy about it, and I had remembered my parents probably saw something on Fox News about it and said, no, I'm not getting my child Conker's Bad Fur Day. Well, too effing bad, because now I can play it. I mean, we had other games like Mario Tennis, which just came out for the Nintendo 64. They ported it over to the Game Boy. I'm not really too sure how that worked out. We had Phantasy Star Online, and who can forget this Dreamcast classic Seaman? What you do is the Dreamcast has an internal port in the controller, and instead of the VMU, which is kind of like a memory card, you plug in this microphone. No, I'm sorry. There's a second slot behind the VMU. You plug in the microphone, and the goal in Seaman is to raise these little weird fish that have human faces, and you talk to them and set the tank temperature and all that, and you constantly check on them, and if you leave them alone for 2 months, you'll come back to a dirty tank and rotting fish remains. But you would talk to them, and one of them would give me a bad attitude, and I'd tell him, "You suck," and he's like, "So does your mother." That's like hilarious. And he had asked, "When's your birthday?" And I'm like, "March 31st." And he said, "Oh, you share a birthday with Al Gore." Fingers! Your birthday with Al Gore. Seaman was an interesting game, was an interesting experiment. I don't remember. No, that was for the Nintendo 64. I was thinking of a release called Hey You Pikachu, which used a microphone, and I saw it played, and I thought it was kind of dumb, honestly. But, you know, some people like it, some people think it's a classic, and hey, they can go with it. But Seaman is one of those classics. I know I have the disc somewhere, and I do have a Dreamcast unit, but it's kind of tucked away, kind of like my Gamecube is. I don't really use it anymore, and I really should. That's a brilliant system that only had maybe 2 years of life that was totally underrated, and I'm not quite sure why. I guess people wanted the PlayStation 2 and Nintendo 64, and they didn't want anything with Sega. I'm not sure if there were fiscal problems or stuff like that, but hey, that was the deal, and Dreamcast dropped down to $100, and they're still well sought out. And for the day and the console generation, the Dreamcast actually had better graphics. Around this time in 2001, we were also looking forward to Metal Gear Solid 2. Now, this is when I really got into the Metal Gear series, and I had played a little bit of the first game, and I thought it was a little bit difficult, but I was playing that when I was around 7 or 8. And I had heard such good things from friends regarding Metal Gear Solid 2, and I said, you know what, that looks really cool. So I decided to give the demo a try. I forget how I got my hands on it, but I got my hands on it, and I'm like, yo, this is freaking cool. So I have fun with the demo, and I'm like, well, when's the game gonna come out? When's the game come out? And Hideo Kojima's like, oh, it'll be out in another year or two. Come on. It turned out to be a really fantastic game. I forgot what I originally gave the game a score of. It was like somewhere around an 88 to a 92, plus or minus 4 points. It ranked pretty high up there. It's still a fantastic game. You should buy it. You can probably still get it in the HD collection, but it established a lot of fundamentals that now the Metal Gear series rely on. The story was great. It was mature, and it was extremely confusing near the end when you had, what's his name? John Doe. No, not John Doe. Who is the main Patriot AI, folks? Help me out. Yeah, JD. I'm sorry, it was John Doe. JD. And he takes the form of Rose and Campbell. He's been talking to Raiden the entire mission. Sorry if I just spoiled that for you. And they just ask and ponder different questions. I'm just like, I'm 13, 14, and I can't understand this stuff. And when you go back there 10 years later, you're like, oh, well, wow, this was a deep and in-depth story. This is like under the radar. Why didn't people, celebrate this more when it came out? And it was a fantastic game and left open many questions, and I played through so many times, and I said, when are they going to continue the story? And we waited some more. 2004, we got Metal Gear Solid 3. We'll get into that in a couple later episodes. Fantastic game. And we were just thinking, when is Kojima gonna release his next title? And Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots didn't come out until 2008. And since I was busy with college and other things initially in my freshman year of college, I never really got to play the game until maybe a year or two later. And I thought it was a pretty fantastic game. It's either in my top 10 or my top 15 rather. The Nintendo 64 was seeing its end of days. We had Ocarina of Time released in 1998 and Zelda Majora's Mask released in December of 2000, I believe. I remember I either pre-ordered it. I think I actually did pre-order it, but I may have also bought it in the store, and I still have the gold cartridge to this day. And that was a fantastic game, and that's definitely my number 4 in the list of greatest games of all time. And Majora's Mask was kind of a hit or miss kind of situation. You either really loved it because of the side quests, or you frickin' hated it because it wasn't enough like Ocarina of Time, or it didn't usurp it or something. But it was still a fantastic game. I mean, come on, it's within my top 5. So I've been gaming since I was 3. Yes, I've been gaming for at least 20 or 21 years now, and that score's pretty high up on top of my list. And I can't remember the exact year. It may have been 2000 or 2001 when Nintendo held their Spaceworld conference, and that's where they show off all the really cool games and stuff. And they showed this quick 1.5 minute video of Link and Ganon fighting, and I just recall looking at the pictures and eventually seeing the video somewhere online, and I said, that looks fantastic. I can't wait till that comes out. And it was either in late 2001 or 2002 we got the first glimpse of Zelda the Wind Waker and its shell-shaded graphics, and everybody and their mom was off the Wallooza, saying that it was too kiddie, it wouldn't do anything, it was ridiculous, this is not what the fans wanted. Nintendo said, be patient, be patient, be patient, and I liked EGM, Electronic Gaming Monthly, and I subscribed to it, but looking back, I honestly thought they were a little elitist on this. The main editor was saying, I really hate this, but I know when that game releases, I'm going to be eating my shoe. I said, you know what, I agree with them. And I had said, okay, it looks good. Regardless, it's Zelda, I'll give it a chance. How could they screw it up? And I had gotten the game for my birthday from one of my best friends, and I'm glad I got it because it was an absolutely fantastic game. Definitely within one of my top 10. And yes, there are a lot of Zelda games in my top 10 games of all time, but I just can't help it. I love Zelda. Some people might call me a Zelda fanboy. I know I'm a walking encyclopedia on the subject, but I'm not going to go out and say that Zelda games are better than others. While my list certainly says that, I'm not going to demean somebody who says, oh, Twisted Metal was my number 1 game of all time, or no, Pikmin was my most fantastic game. I'm not going to deride people if they have good reasons. I just say, there are good games out there, go try them, and if you have something to recommend to me, hell, I'd love to play it. So in 2001, we were kind of transitioning from the 6th generation of video game consoles, which was the PlayStation 1, Game Boy Color, Nintendo 64, did Sega have a system? Maybe, I can't remember. Sega CD, no, Sega CD, the 6th generation, and 5th generation, excuse me. And we were looking forward to the next generation of video game consoles, and I remember I was either in 6th or 7th grade in middle school when we were approaching the 2 previous generations ago. The PlayStation 2 had just come out, the Phat version, and everybody freaking loved it. It had fantastic games. Some people nowadays consider it the best gaming console of all time. It certainly definitely is a contender. But I remember opening the November, October, December. It was a 2001, early 2002 issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly, and it said, GameCube versus Xbox round 1, who's gonna win? And I just remember opening the magazine and seeing the spreads of the GameCube. It's like looking at gadget porn, I swear. And it showed Xbox, it showed the key points, the launch titles and everything, and I gotta relocate that edition. It's out of print, and I know I have the magazine somewhere, but I remember reading the key features of each console, and I said, you know what? I gotta make a decision if I'm gonna get a console and ask my parents for one. Do I want to get a GameCube or do I want to get an Xbox? And unfortunately, I hadn't made up my mind at that point, not only just on the consoles, but on my future plans 10 years down the road for life. I didn't think I was going to be an engineer or anything like that. I didn't know what I was going to be. And so I didn't use a Pew selection matrix like I would have used today to decide that. And unfortunately, the decision I made kept me from enjoying the other console that I didn't choose. And that's one thing I'd like to fix in the future as I become more independent and move out of the house, because I am about to finish my college degree and get out of here, thank goodness. I chose the GameCube, and I got a GameCube for my birthday, and I remember the first game I played for it was Final Fantasy X. And Final Fantasy is one of those things I could just never really get into. They're fantastic games. Some people think they're as legendary as the Legend of Zelda series, no pun intended. But I just couldn't get behind it. I thought the CG was amazing. I thought the game was alright, but I just couldn't really get behind it. Traditional RPGs, save Pokemon, I have a really hard time getting behind. But if you have a hybrid RPG, which really didn't exist at that time, something like Borderlands or Fallout 3, you wouldn't have seen anything like that. I can't remember. And one of the major reasons why I wanted the GameCube was because of one of the launch titles. And I actually have the case right here. Reach for it. Super Smash Bros. Melee. I wanted this game because my friend who had gotten me Wind Waker was getting it as well, and I said, you know what? I loved Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo 64 to death. There were going to be so many new characters. This was going to be a refined 3D game. There were so many goodies coming out for it, and I said, you know what? I just have to have this game. So I bought a GameCube just for Super Smash Bros. Melee, and when I got Wind Waker, that was a plus too. And I'm going to look at the back of the box here just to get, kick some memories in. Oh, I remember these. There was a brand new trophy system. There were mini games. You had new characters like Zelda. All the stuff was refined. It was just everything you loved about Super Smash Brothers. And I remember before the game was ruined for me in college, and I'll go over that in a way far back in a couple episodes. I just remember, I'm playing Link. I got the hammer. Dun 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 dun, and I just freaking knock everybody off the stage, and then I might get, either a noogie or a light punch in the arm or something like that. I just remember having a fantastic time. I probably plugged 1,000 to 2,000 hours into this game, and I know that's a really long stretch of time, and it's too big of a window, but I honestly blew so much time into Super Smash Bros. Melee, it's not even funny. And it's still a classic game to play. I mean, if you go in between Super Smash Bros. Melee, Super Smash Bros., it's not as big of a difference, but if you go between Melee and its sequel Brawl, there's going to be a pretty big difference in the control scheme, characters, and all that fun stuff. But despite how small the discs were and the game console itself was, there were some really fantastic games, re-releases, and emulations for the Nintendo GameCube. I mean, it was just a fantastic system, and despite owning one, I only played roughly 5 to 10 games for the entire library. That makes me feel bad, and one of these days I'd like to start collecting more more Nintendo GameCube games to see what I missed out on. So for this episode, that pretty much wraps it up for me, and next time we'll probably go over it. Everybody knows that GameStop is a brick-and-mortar retailer right now for selling video games, but before they were GameStop, they were actually known as Electronics Boutique, and they were actually ran by better management, and I'll go into that at a much later time. But we'll go into the accessories that were around at the time, the controllers, the Wavebirds, stuff like that, and how Internet 2.0, Web 2.0 wasn't out yet, so if you wanted codes, strategy guides, information, forums weren't really that big of a thing back 10 years ago. I mean, there was no Blogger, I don't even think there was a YouTube 10 years. That might frighten some people. Oh, I've known YouTube my entire life. How could there have been a time without YouTube? Well, there was, and that was called, we used Netscape and Earthlink. I remember looking in the front of the EGM magazine, and at the bottom it says, we use Earthlink for our gaming needs. Oh, I wouldn't touch that shit. It flipped the fan. Well, that'll be it for this episode, and we'll be back to discuss more. See ya.